The Texas sun blazed mercilessly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of what everyone assumed was my son's house, casting long shadows across the marble floors I'd personally selected 3 years ago. At 58, I'd learned that family dynamics could be more treacherous than any corporate boardroom I'd ever navigated, but nothing had prepared me for the words that would shatter my carefully maintained composure at my daughter-in-law's 28th birthday party. "You're just an in-law, Margaret," my son's wife Jessica had said with casual cruelty, her voice carrying across the open-concept living space to where her parents and siblings nodded in agreement. Family decisions should be made by real family members, not people who married into it. The irony was so profound it took my breath away. She was standing in my kitchen, surrounded by furniture I'd bought, dismissing me as an outsider in the house that bore my name on every legal document. I'd spent the morning preparing for this celebration, arranging flowers from my own garden, cooking Jessica's favorite dishes from scratch, and setting up the elegant dining room that had been featured in Southern Living magazine 2 years ago. The house in Austin's prestigious Westlake Hills had been my pride and joy, a 4,000-square-foot testament to the success I'd built as a commercial real estate developer after my husband's death 8 years ago. When my son Michael had gotten engaged to Jessica, I'd offered them the house as a wedding gift, keeping the deed in my name for tax purposes, but giving them complete freedom to make it their home. I'd moved to a smaller place nearby, wanting to give the young couple space while staying close enough to be helpful when grandchildren eventually arrived. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly Jessica would begin treating me like an unwelcome guest in the home I'd created and still legally owned. The subtle disrespect had started small, rearranging furniture without asking, making major decorating changes without consultation, hosting parties and neglecting to invite me until the last minute. But today's birthday celebration had escalated beyond mere rudeness into outright hostility, with Jessica's family joining forces to make it clear that they considered me an inconvenient addition to their family gatherings, rather than the woman who'd raised the man they all claimed to love. Michael stood silently beside his wife, not defending me but not agreeing with her either, a familiar position of cowardly neutrality that had become his signature response to family conflict. At 32, my son had inherited his father's height and charm, but lacked the backbone that had made his father a successful businessman. I'd watched with growing concern as he allowed Jessica to gradually isolate him from old friends, distant relatives, and eventually from me, always choosing the path of least resistance rather than standing up for what was right. Today, his silence spoke volumes about where his loyalties lay, and it wasn't with the woman who'd sacrificed everything to raise him after his father's sudden heart attack. The party guests, mostly Jessica's family and friends, watched this exchange with the barely concealed fascination that people have for family drama they're not directly involved in. Jessica's mother, Patricia, had flown in from Phoenix for the celebration, and seemed particularly pleased by her daughter's assertion of dominance over the household hierarchy. "Jessica's absolutely right," Patricia added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "In-laws should know their place and respect the boundaries of the nuclear family." The comment was clearly directed at me, though she delivered it while looking at the other guests, as if seeking validation for this cruel sentiment. I stood in my own kitchen, surrounded by people enjoying food I'd prepared in a house I owned, listening to them discuss my irrelevance to the family I'd helped create and financially supported for years. The Texas heat outside was nothing compared to the slow burn of rage building in my chest as I realized that Jessica hadn't just married my son. She'd systematically set about erasing me from his life, while enjoying every benefit of the home and lifestyle I'd provided for them. But as I watched her hold court in my living room, dismissing me as just an in-law, I made a decision that would change all of their comfortable assumptions about power, ownership, and exactly who held the cards in this particular family dynamic. The afternoon wore on with Jessica's family treating my home like their personal venue, making themselves completely comfortable while continuing to discuss family matters as if I weren't present. Her brother Derek had helped himself to my expensive whiskey without asking, while her sister Amanda rearranged my carefully planned seating arrangements to better accommodate their extended family group photos. I watched from the margins as they documented this celebration in my space, creating memories that would undoubtedly be shared on social media with captions about family love and togetherness, all while actively excluding the woman who'd made the gathering possible. "Michael, sweetheart," Jessica called from the living room where she was opening gifts. "Can you grab my phone charger from our bedroom?" The possessive hour grated against my nerves, a constant reminder of how she'd claimed ownership of every space in the house without any legal right to do so. I'd noticed this pattern of language over the past 2 years. She spoke about our home, our kitchen, and our decisions, as if I'd simply handed over the property instead of generously allowing them to live there while I maintained ownership and responsibility for taxes, insurance, and maintenance. And the gift opening spectacle provided another layer of insult, as Jessica's family presented her with expensive jewelry, designer handbags, and luxury items that my son could never afford on his middle management salary at the tech company where he worked. Meanwhile, the substantial gift I'd chosen, a weekend spa retreat to her favorite resort, was opened with perfunctory thanks and quickly set aside without the enthusiasm she showed for gifts from her real family. The message was clear. My contributions, whether financial or emotional, were expected rather than appreciated, and my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. Patricia made a show of photographing every gift Jessica received, carefully staging shots that would showcase her daughter's special day for their social media followers back in Phoenix. "This lighting is perfect by the window," she declared, positioning Jessica for photos in front of the custom-built bay window seat that had been one of my favorite design elements when I'd renovated the house. "Your home is so photogenic, Jessica. You and Michael have such wonderful taste." The compliment stung, because it erased my role in creating the beautiful space they were all enjoying, attributing my design choices and investment to my son and daughter-in-law, as if they'd materialized through their own efforts and resources. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated from the celebration happening in my own home. Jessica's college friends dominated one conversation cluster, discussing careers and relationships with the casual confidence of people who'd never faced real adversity. Her extended family occupied another group, sharing stories and inside jokes that dated back decades before Michael had entered their lives. Even my own son seemed more invested in impressing his in-laws than in ensuring his mother felt included in the festivities she'd orchestrated and funded. The final straw came when Jessica's father, Robert, began holding forth about family finances and the importance of young couples establishing their independence from older generations. "Too many parents today refuse to let their adult children truly grow up," he declared, with the authority of someone who'd clearly never been asked to support his daughter's lifestyle. Jessica and Michael have done such a good job of building their own life without depending on handouts from family. The statement was so absurdly disconnected from reality that I nearly choked on my wine. They were literally sitting in a house I owned, discussing their independence while surrounded by furniture and fixtures I'd purchased, eating food I'd prepared for a party I was being excluded from. As evening approached and the party showed no signs of winding down, I excused myself to my former home office, now Jessica's craft room, to collect my thoughts and decide how to respond to the systematic disrespect I'd endured all day. The room still contained my filing cabinets with all the important documents related to the house, including the deed, insurance policies, tax records, and renovation receipts that told the true story of who owned and maintained this property. Looking through these papers, I felt my resolve crystallizing into something harder and more determined than mere anger. From the craft room, I could hear Jessica's family planning an elaborate after-party that would extend the celebration well into the evening. They were discussing who would stay overnight, what breakfast arrangements should be made, and how to best utilize the pool and outdoor entertainment areas for tomorrow's continued festivities. The casual assumption that they could transform my property into their personal vacation resort for an extended weekend was breathtaking in its entitlement, especially given how thoroughly they'd dismissed my relevance to their family dynamic just hours earlier. Michael appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable but not quite ready to address the elephant in the room. "Mom, I know today has been challenging," he said, with the diplomatic tone he'd learned to use when trying to avoid taking sides in conflicts between his wife and mother. Jessica's family can be a little overwhelming when they all get together. His attempt to frame their cruelty as mere social awkwardness rather than deliberate hostility revealed just how deeply he'd internalized their narrative that I was the problem in this equation. A little overwhelming? I repeated, turning from the filing cabinet to face my son directly. Michael, your wife just told a room full of people that I'm just an in-law who should have no say in family decisions. She said this while standing in my kitchen, in my house, surrounded by furniture I bought and decorations I arranged for her birthday party. The facts laid out so plainly seemed to surprise him, as if he'd somehow missed the severity of what had transpired, despite being present for all of it. His face flushed with embarrassment, but his response revealed where his true loyalties lay. She's under a lot of stress with her family visiting, and you know how important this birthday was to her. Maybe if you'd talked to her beforehand about your expectations for the party. He trailed off, apparently realizing that blaming me for my own mistreatment wasn't going to sound reasonable even to his conflict-avoidant ears. My expectations? I asked incredulously. My expectation was to be treated with basic respect in my own home, by people I've supported and welcomed for years. The conversation was interrupted by Jessica calling for Michael from the living room, her voice carrying the imperious tone of someone accustomed to immediate compliance with her requests. I should go, he said, already moving toward the door. But maybe we can talk tomorrow, after everyone leaves. His suggestion that we postpone addressing this conflict until it was more convenient for his wife's social schedule was the final confirmation I needed that my son had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. As he hurried back to rejoin the party that was happening without me, I returned to my filing cabinet and pulled out the documents that would remind everyone exactly who held the real power in this situation. The decision crystallized as I sat alone in my former office, listening to Jessica's family make themselves increasingly comfortable in my home while continuing to treat me like an unwelcome outsider. I pulled out my phone and began making calls that would fundamentally alter the dynamic they'd all grown so comfortable with. The first call was to my attorney, David Chen, who'd handled all my real estate transactions for the past 15 years. David, I need to discuss the house I'm letting my son and daughter-in-law use, I said, cutting straight to the business at hand. I want to understand my options for reclaiming full occupancy. The second call was to my insurance agent to verify that Jessica and Michael weren't listed as additional insureds on the policy. They weren't, which meant their assumption of homeowners' rights had no legal foundation. The third call was to my accountant to confirm the tax implications of what I was about to do. Each conversation reinforced what I already knew. This was my house, in my name, maintained with my money, and I had every legal right to determine who lived there and under what conditions. The comfort level Jessica's family had achieved was built entirely on my generosity, not their entitlement. As I made these calls, I could hear the party escalating in volume and presumption. Someone had apparently decided to use my expensive sound system to play music, and I could hear splashing from the pool area where Jessica's cousins had helped themselves to an impromptu swimming session. The casual assumption that my property was theirs to use however they pleased, combined with their earlier dismissal of my right to have opinions about family matters, created a perfect storm of entitlement that demanded immediate correction. I returned to the living room to find Jessica's father, Robert, holding court near my fireplace, regaling the guests with stories about his own success in the automotive industry, while drinking my wine and enjoying my hospitality. The key to raising independent children, he was saying, is teaching them not to rely on family money as a crutch. Jessica and Michael have done such a wonderful job of building their own life without handouts. And the irony was so thick it was practically visible. He was delivering this speech while standing in a house his daughter lived in rent-free, surrounded by amenities she could never afford on her own income. That's interesting, Robert, I said, entering the conversation with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I'd love to hear more about your philosophy on financial independence, especially as it relates to young couples and housing. Several guests turned to listen, probably expecting another awkward family exchange, but not anticipating the bombshell I was about to drop. Jessica looked annoyed by my interruption of her father's monologue, while Michael appeared nervous about any conversation that might create tension with his in-laws. Well, Robert continued, clearly pleased to have a larger audience for his wisdom. I think too many parents today enable their children instead of forcing them to stand on their own 2 feet. Jessica and Michael are perfect examples of a young couple who've achieved success through their own hard work and smart decisions. He gestured expansively around the room, apparently including the beautiful house as evidence of their independent achievement. They've built something wonderful here without depending on family money or support. The statement was so absurdly divorced from reality that several guests who knew the true situation began shifting uncomfortably, sensing that this conversation was heading somewhere dangerous. "You know, Robert," I said, my voice carrying the calm authority that had served me well in decades of real estate negotiations. "I'm fascinated by your perspective on financial independence. I wonder if you'd be interested in seeing exactly how Jessica and Michael achieved this beautiful life you're so proud of." I walked to my purse and retrieved the folder of documents I'd collected from the office, setting it down on the coffee table where everyone could see it. "I have some paperwork here that tells the complete story of how this wonderful home came to be." The room grew noticeably quieter as I opened the folder and spread out the documents like evidence in a trial. "This is the original deed to the property," I announced, holding up the first document. "Purchased by Margaret Thompson in 2019 for $800,000 cash." Several guests leaned forward to look at the legal document, which clearly showed my name as the sole owner. "This is the insurance policy," I continued, producing the next paper. "Also in Margaret Thompson's name, with annual premiums of $3,200 that I pay personally every year." Jessica's face had gone pale as she began to understand where this presentation was heading, while Robert looked confused and slightly annoyed by what he probably perceived as an unnecessary complication to his speech about independence. "And here," I said, pulling out a thick stack of receipts, "are the renovation invoices totaling $180,000 for the kitchen remodel, bathroom upgrades, and landscaping that created the beautiful space we're all enjoying today. All paid for by Margaret Thompson." The evidence was mounting before their eyes, each document destroying the narrative they'd constructed about my irrelevance to this family's success. "I don't understand what point you're trying to make," Patricia said defensively, though her tone suggested she was beginning to grasp the implications of what she was seeing. "This seems like a private family matter that doesn't need to be discussed in front of guests." Her attempt to shut down the conversation revealed her growing awareness that her daughter's position wasn't as secure as they'd all assumed. "Actually," I replied smoothly, "since your family has spent the afternoon discussing my role as just an in-law who should have no say in family decisions, I thought it might be helpful to clarify exactly what my relationship is to this household." Michael finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak than his usual confident tone. "Mom, I think we should discuss this privately later. But I was done with private discussions that led nowhere, and public humiliations that went unanswered." "No, Michael," I said firmly. "We're going to discuss this right now, in front of everyone who spent today explaining why my opinions don't matter and why I should know my place as an outsider in this family." And I turned to address Jessica directly, my voice calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of someone who'd reached the end of their patience. "You told me I'm just an in-law who shouldn't have a say in family decisions. You're absolutely right that I'm an in-law. I'm your husband's mother, and as such, I'm not actually family to you by blood. But you seem to have forgotten that this house isn't your family's property. It's mine. Every brick, every fixture, every piece of furniture you've been rearranging and claiming as your own belongs to me." The silence that followed was deafening, as the full reality of the situation finally penetrated their entitled assumptions. The transformation in the room was immediate and devastating. Jessica's confident hostess demeanor crumbled as she realized that her entire foundation of authority had just been publicly demolished. Her family members began exchanging uncomfortable glances, suddenly understanding that they'd been treating the actual homeowner like an unwelcome guest while celebrating in her property. Robert's face had turned an interesting shade of red as he processed the fact that his speech about independence had been delivered while standing in a house his daughter didn't own, couldn't afford, and was living in purely through someone else's generosity. "This changes nothing," Jessica said, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "We live here. We've made it our home. And we have rights. But even as she spoke, I could see the uncertainty creeping into her expression as she realized how tenuous those claimed rights actually were. "What rights exactly?" I asked with genuine curiosity. "You don't pay rent, you're not on the deed, you're not on the insurance, and you don't contribute to the mortgage because the house is paid off. What you have is permission to live here, which I granted as a gift to my son, and that permission can be revoked." Patricia stepped forward, trying to salvage the situation with the same entitled confidence her daughter had displayed earlier. "You can't just throw them out of their home. They have established residency, and there are laws about unlawful eviction." Her attempt to threaten me with legal action was almost amusing, given how thoroughly documented my ownership was. "You're absolutely right that there are laws," I agreed pleasantly, which is why I called my attorney this afternoon to understand the proper procedures for reclaiming my property when the current occupants are family members living there without a lease. The party that had been celebrating Jessica's birthday and her family's superiority over the inconvenient in-law was now witnessing the complete reversal of that power dynamic. Michael looked like he might be sick, as he finally understood the consequences of allowing his wife to humiliate his mother in her own home. "Mom, please," he said quietly. "We can work this out." Jessica didn't mean what she said earlier, but his wife's immediate protest revealed that she had meant every word. "I absolutely did mean it. Just because she owns the house doesn't mean she gets to control our lives and our family decisions." "You're absolutely right again, Jessica," I said with a smile that was becoming genuinely warm now that the truth was finally in the open. "I don't get to control your lives or your family decisions. You're free to make whatever choices you want, have whatever opinions you want, and treat whoever you want with disrespect. You can even continue to consider me just an in-law, whose thoughts and feelings don't matter to your family dynamic. But you'll be making those choices and living with those attitudes in a home you pay for yourselves, not in my house where you've been living as my guests." The guests who had arrived for a birthday celebration were now witnessing the complete dismantling of everything they thought they knew about this family's dynamics. Some were already making quiet excuses and gathering their belongings, clearly uncomfortable with being present for such a dramatic reversal of fortune. Others seemed transfixed by the reality that the woman they'd spent all day dismissing as an irrelevant in-law actually held all the cards in this family's living situation. "I'm giving you 30 days, I announced, pulling out my phone to make notes about the conversation. "That's more than generous under the circumstances, and it will give you time to find a place that truly belongs to you, where you can make all the family decisions you want without input from inconvenient in-laws." As I spoke, I could see Jessica's birthday celebration transforming into the day her comfortable life began to unravel, all because she'd forgotten the basic principle that you shouldn't bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand holds the deed to your house. The sweet revenge wasn't in the shock on their faces or the scrambling to understand their new reality. It was in the knowledge that I'd spent years being generous, supportive, and accommodating, only to be dismissed and disrespected at every turn. Now they would learn exactly what my presence in their lives had been worth, and exactly what they'd thrown away when they decided I was just an in-law, whose contributions didn't matter. Sometimes the most powerful lesson comes not from what you say, but from what you take away.